Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our email impersonation session. Today's session is being sponsored by DNS. DNS is a South Carolina-based company with offices and staff throughout the region. We have 20 years of experience helping businesses and public sector entities solve their most complex IT and infrastructure challenges with our dedicated local engineers and support from leading technology manufacturers. Today's presenters for our session will be Assistant County Manager Randy Cress from Rowan County and Chris Wallace from Buncombe County, which is the CIO. You guys go ahead and take it away. We can't hear you, Randy and Chris.
Are you talking? Okay.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully my screen shared correctly. This is the first time doing this, so bear with me. Email impersonation, email security, however you want to describe this, the technical aspects of what we're talking about are SPF, which is Sender Policy Framework, DKIM, domain key. Oh, the acronym's failing me. It's message signing, and DMARC, which is kind of the glue that holds SPF and DKIM together. All right, hang on, my PowerPoint's not behaving. There we go. So there we go. Domain keys identified mail, DMARC, domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. So the key with these is these protect your domain from spoofing. They do not help you with other domains. So, for instance, Buncombe County doing this. The way this works is when Buncombe County turns this on, if Randy at Rowan gets an email that says it came from Buncombe County, all these checks happen in the background, and if that doesn't validate, then his system will reject that email. It does not help Buncombe County with Rowan being spoofed, as an example. So all of these rely on DNS records. They're all text records. DKIM actually is a private public key scenario. So that one's a little bit more than just creating a DNS record. We'll get into a little bit of the technical aspects here, but I'm not going too deep. Once the DNS setup's done, that's pretty much it for most of things today. I think most of us are probably using some type of SaaS-based mail, so either Office 365 or Google. All this stuff's going to be turned on the receiver side. So the sender has to set this up. So you at your organization need to get your DNS admin or your Exchange admin or whoever your mail admin is to do some work here. So the basics, SPF and DKIM. SPF is checking the 5123. That's the envelope or the mail from domain name address. DKIM is verifying the display from, or otherwise known as the header. There's kind of an example of a DKIM record pasted in here. I can dig some of ours if we want to see that. So sender side, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Sender creates a DNS record. On the DKIM side, there's a key pair and a little bit of enablement. On the receiver side, the mail server basically verifies all these things. It does its checks and balances, and depending on how you configure it, there's a response there. So details on SPF. Designed to prevent the sender address domain spoofing by the receiver verifying the IP of the sending server matches a list of IPs designated in the SPF record. Checks the mail from, return to field, relies on a TXT. It's always going to start with V equal SPF1, and then you include various items. Could be IP addresses, could be DNS records. Of course, if it's DNS record behind the scenes, it's going to look up all the IPs for that DNS record. And it ends with some type of all. They'll get into the details of that in a little bit. Sender has to turn it on, receiver just validates it. There's the RFC in here if you want to get into the nitty-gritty details. Happens in the hello handshake. If it fails, the receiver server will generate a message. Example of that there, received SPF fail, protection.outlook.com. Microsoft doesn't designate this IP that this came from as a permitted sender. And then the receiving server will decide how to handle that. You can configure your server to do various things there. You could display a banner that says this failed its message authentication check. It might be spoofing. You could send it to junk. You could quarantine it, or you could outright reject it. So the kind of the setup on this is, on the sending side, you need to do some recon. You need to know all the mail servers, either IPs if you're on-prem, or DNS records if you're using third parties, that are authorized to send mail on your behalf. So in the case of Buncombe County, that's Office 365, that's iContact, which we use for some mailing list stuff. There is a state library server where we send email out on the, your book reservations, things like that. You need to know all of those. If you miss one, there's a decent chance that the recipient is going to reject that email. So there's a little bit of set the stuff up, watch it, add some more, and eventually you get to the point to where you can go full on DMARC reject, which we'll get to at the end. Kind of that's the gist of it. Grab everything. It goes into your record. There are some limitations here. Record's going to end in an all. You have some options there. You can do a -all, which is a hard fail. You've got the little inye all for a soft fail, generally used for testing purposes. And you've got a +all, which basically defeats the purpose of the all at all. +all does nothing, no fails. Might as well not have an SPF record. One of the caveats with this is this 10 DNS lookups. So if you include your third parties, your outlook.microsoft.com or star.icontact or whatever, what happens behind the scenes is it does a DNS check for each of those domains and catalogs a list of those servers. So in Microsoft's case, I think spf.office365.com refers to spfa.office365.com, which then refers to spfb. So each of those is considered a lookup. If you hit more than 10, it more or less breaks the record. There are some ways to squish that down. Basically, there's some services and tools you can use that will go and catalog all the IP addresses for each of those lookups. IP addresses don't count as a lookup, so you can have as many as you want. The issue there is you've got to maintain that. So if Microsoft adds a new IP to their list, it's not automatically added to yours. Moving on, there are various tools out here you can use. This is one. You've got DMARC Analyzer, SPF Checker, this SPF Validator, MX Toolbox is a popular one. These also usually have DKIM lookups and DMARC lookups. You can do NS lookup, you can do dig. So there's quite a few options for checking this stuff out. So that's kind of the gist of SPF. It basically is, these are the servers that are authorized to send mail for my domain. Then you've got DKIM. So DKIM is a message signature. It uses the display name, same type of deal. It's a text record. There's going to be a public-private key. The way this works is the sending server is going to sign every outgoing message with that key. Where this gets tricky is list servers. We all use list servers, lots of list servers. NickelG's is a list server. Randy and I actually worked pretty hard to get this fixed with UNC. So what was happening there was NickelG's would, you would send the message, right? It would be DKIM signed. The NickelG's listserv would then modify that message and then resend it. Well, when it modifies the message, it breaks the signature. The message is no longer validates as being signed. So that was in his case. In my case, we both are set to DMARC reject. Those messages that were coming from within our organizations through the NickelG's listserv are all getting rejected. So the signature can be invalidated if the message is modified in any way. It's kind of like when you put your message in an envelope and you seal it and you put a wax stamp on the back. If the wax stamp is in place when the recipient gets it, they know the message is good. If it's been altered, then it can be rejected. So setup on this, a little more complicated than SPF. You need the public-private key. You create a DNS record again. Usually it's going to be selector underscore domain key dot whatever your domain name is. It's going to start with V equal DKIM1 and P equal whatever that public key is. There's an example here. And again, I'll dig these in a second, and you can kind of see what some of them look like with a regular DNS lookup. Validation for this, there's some options there. DKIM's a little bit more difficult. You can't just kind of look up every DKIM record. You need to know what the selector is. So DMARC. So DMARC is kind of the thing that glues all this stuff together. The way it works is it checks both of these. It's another DNS record. So kind of settings, same deal. It's going to start with V equal DMARC1. Then you've got your P value. There's three options there: none, do nothing, quarantine. That depends on the recipient server, but basically you're saying this message is suspicious. The recipient can, they can put that into hosted quarantine. They can put it into somebody's junk, however they want to handle it. And then your reject option, which is kind of the holy grail. Basically, once you get to reject, that says this email didn't come from my system or from any system that I've authorized. It's spoofed. You should just reject it. And it doesn't get delivered. It's just an outright reject. Your PCT is how many percent. You could say I only want this applied to 80% of incoming messages. I can't think of a good reason to do that, but generally that's going to be 100. You got your RUA, which is where your aggregate reports go to. Your RUF, which is forensic reports if you want a lot of detail. There are some other options for this. You can, feel free to Google and look those up. It can get pretty technical. Resources on this. So your general DMARC overview. There's some links here. Testing sources, DMARC Analyzer, RDMARC. There's a DMARC Reports Parser. This one actually is an install. The DMARC reports I'll show in a second are just XML. They're not super easy, not really human readable. So there are tools out there that will help you decipher those reports. So DMARC Analyzer, I think got bought by Mimecast, but that's one. Randy, I'll get to show the tool he uses. We were using Postmark initially. which hopefully this is showing correctly. So this was an example of a postmark digest showing, what IPs are sending email on our behalf, if they're SPF aligned, if they're DMARC aligned. We've recently switched to using DMARC. They're a local company in Brevard. Not to sell them, but they are offering an extended trial and a discount through this Nickel Giza 2020 link, if anybody is interested. So XML example. This is kind of what the record looks like. If you've got a lot of time on your hands, you could probably make some use of it. Most of us don't. So using a third-party service to aggregate and clean up these and make it prettier, put it into some dashboards, is definitely useful. Overview of how it all works. Sender composes the email. Their server adds the DKIM signature or header, sends it to the recipient. The recipient server gets it, then they're going to check it. They're going to do their standard stuff. They're going to validate the signature using that public key that's in your DNS record. They're going to validate the SPF. So did the sending server, is the sending server authorized? Then they're going to check your DMARC policy, and depending on what's set there, take an action. Could be accept it, could be reject it, could be quarantine it. Then depending on that, the recipient gets the message. Trying to think on the DMARC side. Well, sorry, not sure what I was thinking. So best practices. Eventually, you want to start out with DMARC none. Basically, that's not going to do anything. All it's it's going to create the reports. The reports will get sent to your aggregator, which will tell you where you have issues. If you have issues, you missed an SPF, an IP, you've got something sent in that you're not signing. So this is where that kind of, you get the reports, you check it, you make changes, give it a couple of weeks, check it, make changes. At that point, you kind of have two options. You can go to quarantine. If you think you've still missed something, which case the recipient should get the email. It'll just go into their junk folder, or it might have a banner depending on your email config. Eventually, you want to go to reject. In our case, we were set to none before I even got my current role. It had been running, just nobody was checking it. So we made a couple of quick changes, watched it for a week or so, and went straight to reject. I'll let Randy share, his process. So concerns here. Phishers will use SPF, DKIM, and DMARC as well. So, if I'm wanting to phish, I'm going to set up. We actually have a lookalike domain. I think it's Buncombe, but BUMCOMBE. If I wanted to send some phishing emails out as Buncombe with an M, and I wanted them to get treated as legitimate emails, I would also set up SPF, DKIM, and DMARC on my domain. So, it's not an end all. Misconfiguration can be a problem. In some cases of recipient servers, your quarantine setting, they don't actually do anything with it. Same deal on your sending server, if it's misconfigured, or the receiving server may ignore everything. It's domain verification, not email verification. So Gmail, as an example, is generally 100% compliant with all these standards. If you get an email from Gmail, it's going to validate for SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, all three. If somebody does get into one of your user accounts, they can send email out from your county or your city, and it will validate. You know, this doesn't prevent somebody being in the system. The key for that generally is MFA, at least today. Doesn't help with sound alike or look alike domains. I think the thing I was going to say before, crap, sorry, lost it again. So that's kind of a quick run through. I'm gonna, before I let Randy take over, he wanted to talk about .gov. Hopefully everybody can see this. I wrote a little Python script to check all the 100 counties. I'm not doing cities at this point, so this is all the 100 counties in the state. I've got the state at the top just as an example. So, you know, is the site HTTPS? Is it .gov? What's the SPF setting? And are they using DMARC? We also have DNSSEC over here on the end, but that's a completely separate discussion. So, you know, we can see the majority of us are using SPF. There are a few that have some issues. Again, you know, if you see yourself in here, you can use MX Toolbox or whatever to check your SPF record, and it'll give you pointers on how to fix that. So skipping over to DMARC, which is kind of the end all here. We've got a handful. The state is set to none, so you know they're just doing recon. We're set to reject. Mecklenburg is set to reject, but they have an SPF issue. Randy is set to reject at Rowan, and Union County is actually set to reject. They have no all on their SPF. So some catches with these, you know, your DMARC doesn't necessarily apply if your SPF record's broken. The thing I keep losing is when DMARC validates, only SPF has to validate or DKIM. You don't need both. So if you're sending from an authorized IP, but you're not able to sign it for whatever reason, that will validate okay for DMARC purposes, or depending on how your SPF record's configured, if you send from a server that you haven't put into your SPF, but it is being signed, that will typically validate as well. There are some more settings you can play with on DMARC to force that to reject pretty much everything that doesn't validate for both, but that gets a little complicated. SPF is, well, DKIM's easier to manage on the third-party side. That kind of covers everything. I think I got one more, so I showed that. So let me do a couple of digs here real quick, and I'm going to copy and paste so I don't take up too much time. Maybe. There we go. So this is going to get SPF records. So dig is TXT type 8.8.8.8 and buncombecounty.org. So this one here is an example of our SPF straight out of DNS. To get DKIM, I don't know what that just did. DKIM's, again, a little more complicated. So you need to know the full DNS record for that. So in this case, this is iContact, one of theirs. So you can see the V DKIM1, key type's RSA, and that P is actually the public key. We have multiples. You'll probably have multiples. And then DMARC, it's going to be always _DMARC whatever your domain is. So this is our live one. Policies reject. SP is one I didn't cover. That's for your subdomains, 100%, and that's our personal aggregate reporter. I did have forensic reporting set up initially. I'd never looked at them, so I took it out. This is one of those things where if you can set everything up according to the standard, but there's if you're not going to look at it, it's probably not a whole lot of point in doing it if you're not going to manage it. So that's the gist of mine. Little quicker than I expected. I'll let Randy take over. He wanted to particularly talk about the .gov initiative, and he can give some feedback on how his county did SPF, DKIM, and DMARC.
Hey, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I thought that was really good. Do you mind going back one slide, or maybe to the other, where it had the reasons for the fishers that you had? I think it's like 1 or 2 slides back. Yeah. Okay. So Chris just really gave you everything you needed to know about the DNS and the changes for this. And one of the reasons why we both thought that this session was extremely important, one is from the data that he was showing at the end, where there's, at least from the county perspective, we can see that a lot of people have gone through the SPF. That's an older method for some of your spam prevention and phishing. But the reason why you go through and you see the surprising low number of counties is it does relate to, you'll break things. It is just DNS records, but you'll break your email or have a lot of problems. But at the same time, the payoff or the reward for that little bit about amount of time originally kind of researching and setting up and going through that couple of weeks has a huge payoff. A lot of the attacks that are being sent out at this point in time are initiating from phishing attempts, and it could be a simple phishing attempt, but what really makes it bad is whenever it has the social engineering side and it does look like it's a coworker. And that's specifically what these 3 items in combination are designed to prevent, is from that social engineered phishing attempt that looks like it's your finance officer sending something to the county manager or board or something from that perspective. And that goes back to, and I think Mecklenburg's talked a good bit about their items that they had. And that's one of their findings was, some of the internal, or it looked like an internal message. So it's worth the amount of time it takes. Again, we could talk about a lot of different things, but when Chris and I were going through, it was, let's just really tackle this because we think it's concise enough that everybody can go through. All of the records you can query on your own, so you can check what you're doing, you can check what your neighbors are doing, and you can really find out. And plus, we're a good peer organization to be able to work with each other as well. And so that's really the point of this. It's not. I mean, I'm more of a purist, so I'm doing it just because there's RFCs, and I'd like to make sure I'm standardizing on anything that comes out. But the reason for those that don't have it implemented to put the effort into it is to reduce your attack surface, and it does have a pretty good reduction on that attack surface. So I'm gonna go ahead and share one of my screens. Let's see, and Chris, I don't know if you'll have to stop sharing. Nope, I've got it. Okay, so and I know Chris mentioned at one time he was using DMARC Analyzer, and it was purchased by Momcast, and DMARC is out there. It really didn't matter, or doesn't matter who you use. It's more, first thing I'll show you is pretty much what the cost models are, just so you get a feel. So just to give you an idea, this is not a break the bank type item. If your email volume of your compliance is under 100,000 a month, you're looking at $20 a month, or less than 300 a year. And even if you were in a high volume, you're still $500 per year. And I would honestly say once you have it set up and you know exactly what you're managing, you really don't even need the records anymore. It's more just something you can go back and check on every once in a while. But just kind of wanted to mention that it is an affordable security option. I mean, you can do it completely for free if you just want to set up the DNS records and you know exactly what your outbound mail is. So here's our data. I think I did it for the last 3 months. So our volume is less than that 100,000. So again, it's $20 a month. And so we have 3 different domains, 1 primary root and 2 subs for mailing list that we utilize. And you'll see that, you know, we are in 100% reject. We did actually, you know, go into the quarantine mode at first, just in case we missed a message that was, you know, something we needed to go back and release. But during that, most of it was listserv messages. So the goal here is, you know, you're always going to see some that are rejected. That's because people are, you know, all the time trying to go through and send mail on your behalf. And you'll see in our case, for Rowan County, pretty much what you ultimately end up understanding is what services, cloud-based or on-prem, do you utilize across your entire domain for sending outbound emails. And that's one of the reasons why nc.gov is going to have so difficult of a time doing this, because they'd have to deal with so many different departments. Internally, we have to deal with different departments, and people will set up and they'll send emails. So like in our case, the library may, you know, go and grab a simple like constant contact or some, you know, newsletter service. The end game here is, unless you're authorizing a particular service or IP address to send an email with your name or your county email address or municipality, it should fail. And that's the way it is designed to work. And so in our case, you know, we have our Office 365, and it's specifically to, you know, our designated you know, way that we send outbound email. SMTP to go is a really low cost service that lets you do authenticated mail messages. We use that for multifunction machines that are off network that need to authenticate. We don't want to run it back through us. Really good price there, and we've got some G Suite stuff that we've tested. So we're good there. Forwarders are those that are sending mail on our behalf. Like we have Fresh Service, we have some SendGrid, and this is where you get into having to work with mail messages that might be going out through your ERP system or forwarding that way. And failed, here's what you want to see, and I'll show you where there's some issues. I went back 3 months just to show a particular piece of it, and this is what Chris and I were working with. School of Government was really good, but we had to involve UNC with the Lyris listserv, and ultimately figured out that really the listserv maintainer can make changes. But this is exactly what you want. I want you know, Chinese and Ireland addresses that are trying to send emails as one of our county employees to fail, because, you know, that more than likely is legitimate on a bunch of different reasons. But the other thing is, it's not just emails that are coming to you, it's emails potentially going to, you know, your citizens or businesses that they're spoofing as you. And again, that's exactly what you don't want to have happen. And that's what it's designed to protect. So here's where it comes into problems. is if we go back, and these are older because most all the listservs on UNC are now corrected. And that's the reason why everybody sees on the listserv, instead of that nice, pretty name, you see the email address. And then some people have different things in play. And you might say, well, that's kind of going backwards. Well, the bottom line was the UNC listserv, along with any other listserv, should never send email on your behalf. And that's exactly what they were doing. You were sending a message to the listserv, and it was coming back and saying, okay, I'm going to rewrite that as you, and really you never want to authorize that. And so that's the reason why the email addresses are different. We've tried, the state has a listserv, and we've sent them messages, and we'll still work with them. It's really hard because listservs get into, you know, a skill set of one, maybe two individuals that really understand how it's set up, and then it's typically separate from your DNS people. And then every time you mention, you know, DKIM and SPF, they start thinking about their own records and how they send mail. And it's like, no, it's not about that. It's about what you're doing with our mail. Kernersville runs a listserv, and again, that's an older, and so that's what that comes into, and that's their particular list. And so, and this is really the benefit of doing a tool like this. And when Chris was showing that particular record, and I'll go down to DNS records, DMARC check, and I'll just run this for Rowan County. And so this is basically a web-based dig. And so you have your RUA, and once that email goes to this address for DMARC Analyzer, and it has our headers in there, that's where it starts watching all that. And so we're in that reject mode as well. And as Chris mentioned, there is an RUF for the forensics here. What I had heard, especially with us having different types of records for both HIPAA and CJIS, is you really don't want, in case your message gets forwarded over, you shouldn't have it in email anyway. But say, for instance, you didn't, and you do forensic records, now you've got them saved in another service. So unless there was really some action you were taking on that, bottom line is there's a lot of noise. You really just want to make sure what you've got is set up right and minimal from that. And I'd worked with Scott at Fuquay Varina in Salisbury, and we just, you know, we were trying to see if there would be a way from a nickel Jesus standpoint to just like buy a larger account and separate it out. So you can kind of see, you know, Scott's in quarantine, not aligned and passed. Actually, he's in monitor mode. So they're still going through, and depending on what all services you have set up, it may take you more than a week. If you've got a monthly report that goes out through a SaaS-based service, you may miss that. So you might want to give it enough time to go through before you switch from a monitor to a reject. But again, it's one of those, at some point you'll just want to pull the trigger on. And it truly is just the records. You know, to what my data was a little bit older. Chris was nice enough to write a script that actually catches it. I was just going through and collecting, but just to put it in perspective, here's all 100 counties. This is red from, you know, a year ago, and it's very little. And again, the DKIM is an additional add-on. Anybody that was using Microsoft, and I honestly think we're still kind of in that same boat. I'll check because I don't think I ever submitted. Some of it's just irritating to do, to say the least. It's, you know, you go in and it's like, you know, what am I really gaining from this? But at the end of the day, once you have everything set, it's something like your SPF records. It's a set it and forget it, and you don't have to worry about it. So there was a big issue in BitSite reporting, which is offered by the state, and they can give you details, and it affects your security score. So like ours, this particular selector one still is showing 1024 bit. Everybody that was using Microsoft up until December of 2019 couldn't do a 2048 bit key where Google was. And apparently, you know, at that point, BitSite decided that they would lower your scores on that. And I'm kind of stuck in this weird state where you have to do everything through PowerShell to get it to regenerate your keys. I think selector 2 is the one that actually went through or it should have gone through. Yeah, you probably can't do it because you have to rotate your keys and things like that. So, but anyway, that's a quick. I think we should open it up for any questions that folks may have, and I can definitely tell you it's worth doing. Again, it may seem pretty simple. Bottom line is, once it's all said and done, it's a couple of record entries in text lines in your zone file. So it's not overly complicated from that standpoint, but I think Chris and I can definitely help answer any questions you may have and open it up if there are any. Yeah, let's see. I'm fighting BitSite DKIM size deal 2, driving me crazy. Yeah, Ted, if are you, let's see, hold on. I kind of hid those records. I don't know if I'll be able to unhide them. Let's see if we unhide columns here. Onslow, yeah, SPF protection outlook. Yeah, so you've probably got the same thing where you've got 1024-bit keys. You can actually regen and generate your 2048-bit keys. Be careful. Microsoft support does not understand how to help you with it at all. And I mean, I escalated up. It's pitiful. So
I think we're 2048 on the Microsoft side, but iContact will only use 2024. They don't offer 2048 as an option at all. So we're getting dinged there on BitSite.
Yeah. Yeah, for some of us, I think we see it as a challenge. It's kind of like, it's not just about checking the boxes. We truly want to see a result from it. And that's really what it is. And that's kind of what I would, emphasize to everybody is just, take it as a challenge to try and get, your records in. Not seeing any other questions, I'll mention you can, so, you have your MX records. Let me see if I can do this real quick. I'm just going to do a new note here. I don't think I have anything personal on the side that'll be in that screen share. Because mainly I don't have a Telnet client. I don't necessarily want to pay. So if you were to Telnet to, host on port 25, and you would get a connection, and like Chris said, it uses the hello protocol. So if you do like an hello kitty, and I always do kitty just because like hello kitty, it will return your results back, and you would say mail from, and this is where you would spoof, and you would say manager at county.gov, receipt to, finance at county.gov, data period, and then that's when you do your subject. And as you can tell, I've been doing this, I just remember doing it in UNC Charlotte on their lab computers, and it was the most fun thing 28 years ago. Get this money over, and if you don't have that set up, that's literally as simple as it is to do a phishing attempt. If I were to Telnet and look up your MX record and send that, and it would look completely legit. You'd have stuff in your header, but everything you've trained your users on for phishing attempts and what to watch for doesn't mean a thing. And I don't mean that lightly. That's exactly what it means, and that's why it's important to do this. You can train your users all day long, but if you can impersonate down to the mail from and the receipt to, none of your security awareness training for phishing means anything. So that's another reason why this is important. Is because it really is that simple. I mean, that would be the commands that you would have to type. And believe me, people don't need to know the commands. They can just, grab a script. So that's really that piece. As far as, oh, I'm sorry, can you not see a screen share on that? I saw Bryce wrote that. Was that screen share available?
I saw it.
Okay. It might have just been where I was sharing it first. Okay. so there's that piece, and that's really the email side of it. I think between Chris and mine, in discussion on that, it really should be pretty straightforward for that. For those of us fully on-prem, other than recon, what service are authorized to send on our behalf will be your recommendation for step number one. Really, if your SPF record itself covers everything, Chris, what would you think on that? I mean, you're probably the SPF's good. You've got all your on-prem. You could probably go ahead and I'd say you could create your records, put it in a quarantine mode, and you could even list your own email address in the RUA just to get some of your feedback if you weren't going to have two, and just separate those out. What would you think?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I mean, we were fully on-prem when we started. You know, the gist of moving to Office 365 was, and we're still kind of in a hybrid there, was removing the IPs from our SPF for our on-prem servers and putting in the spf.office365.com or whatever. And then of course we added a couple of DKIM records for the cloud service. But migration wise from on-prem Exchange to Office 365, that was kind of it as far as this goes. At that point we did, I don't think we had a DMARC record at that point. We were just doing SPF and DKIM. DMARC was something that I kind of found out about and brought in and kind of put in place. So yeah, I think, you know, moving on-prem to Office 365 at least is changing your SPF. You know, you remove your on-prem servers because they're no longer authorized or you're not using them at all. Take those IPs out, put in the DNS for Office 365, and update your DKIM signatures. That's kind of the gist of that. There was another question about Constant Contact MailChimp. For me personally, I always have an issue with third parties sending email on my behalf, but you know, the business decides that more than the security. The issues, you know, hopefully those are going to require a login. Hopefully whoever's logging in is using a strong password or MFA if possible. I don't think, you know, you're going to, if somebody were to connect in to an iContact mail server and try to send email on your behalf, it shouldn't be signed by your DKIM record. That should fail. It should only sign if you're logged in as an authorized user. So if a third party gets access to iContact and tries to spoof your domain, that should fail. If they get your, you know, they fish one of your users who's an iContact admin, and then they log in with that person's account, I don't really know what you could do. You know, you're kind of at that point, it's no different than if they got into your on, you know, your posted email. You're kind of screwed. Not a whole lot you can do there. You know, if somebody gets none of this protects from a third party getting access to one of your users' official accounts. Once they're in, they're in. And that's where the MFA comes into place. Or strong passwords, or both. Preferably both, but you know. Again, yeah, go ahead.
Chris, I was going to add to you. Yeah, I think the one that I would worry about, or I did worry about, was like SendGrid. We had a provider through Tyler, and I think one of their email outs wanted to use SendGrid, and SendGrid's you know, highly used mass mail. It is used for a lot of different services, including bulk campaigns, things like that. So that one really bothered me. So yeah, you do at least want to be cognizant of the ones that you would have to enable. Again, if you look back on mine, a lot of that is just direct IP address and mail servers that are compromised, that are being used. So I think that helps. from that perspective. But yeah, definitely take, and that's the thing, excuse me, that's the thing. Once you have this, those messages will fail. So if you do have a department that's trying to set something up, you know, kind of under the radar, they're going to constantly have issues, and then they'll come to you and say, hey, what's going on? And then that's where you can have a list of approved or different items that you, or different providers that you really are comfortable with, and be able to work with them in that capacity as well. Again, it's just so easy for everybody to put in an email address and say, what's my reply to, things like that. So, and so a real brief note on some of the other efforts. You can do a lot of the same with your website, you know, just as a topic to touch on. You know, I heard Todd was mentioning SSL labs and security frameworks, and Todd Shanley with Cabarrus County. And, you know, there's a lot of things you can do with it, setting up SSL, you know, changing your certificates. And then there's HSTS, which is basically saying that everything from your domain that you go to should be HTTPS, which, you know, limits your impersonation for different sites that could be compromised and things like that. So a lot of these items start applying across the board for email, you know, for websites. And so you'll find once you get in, start looking at different ways to do some of your DNS records, that there's a lot of other options and RFCs that are out there that, you know, you can apply and start securing your environment. To your point, Chris, when you said that about, you know, if you had a compromised email account and it was sending out emails, well, having all of this set up with your DMARC in a full reject mode really takes one of the items out of the equation, or at least reduces, you know, kind of that scrambling to figure out, well, you know, was it a compromised account? Right now, as we can see with what Chris and I showed, you would have two things you would have to search for: was a compromised account, or did somebody just spoof the address? From the end user side, unless you can get the full headers, they're going to look about the same. So again, we wanted to raise this as an awareness, and know that if you are having concerns with some of the issues with either the state listservs, it's hard when it's you know, Chris and I and Union and MEC, and again, like Chris said, MEX is broke. So if they're on here, we've been trying to reach out to you to tell you about your SPF records. But you know, if we can have a few more folks in this battle camp to help us, then, you know, it definitely, it's worthwhile. So, and I will say, at least for the benefit of those that, you know, we're on the session, I think we started off with 100 and dropped down to 60. So I know it's not fun and exciting and the most amazing thing ever, but it's very important, and we can't figure out any other way to get the message across other than, you know, to be very appreciative of your time to let us tell you about some of the items and what it can do. Any other questions? And the other thing is, and I'll mention this, is the state, there's a big push from the state through election security, you know, to look at going to a .gov. And I know that's an absolute pain for a lot of people, just, you know, for what all you would have to change in your records, your email, all of your social media, things like that. So they are offering the ability to do like a subdomain. So like, you know, we set up rowancounty.nc.gov just as a CNAME over to our site. And they could do that as well, just so you can have a .gov presence if you don't want to go through the full .gov. I'll be happy to send out the information on that. I need to check with Maria and Rob at the state to see. I'm sure she doesn't want to get all those emails directly. But it literally is as easy as putting in a ticket, and they can work with you on getting that set up.
We were doing a .gov 2020 when they were talking about selling .org to a private entity, and of course that finally got nixed. But that was really scary for a minute.
Yeah, and if for those of you that have been through the .us, that was extremely not a fun time, and not knowing what was going to happen and whether or not you're going to lose all of your efforts that you've had in there. But if it's .gov, it makes it pretty straightforward. And .gov does have all the DNSSEC and everything, and they're working really well. So we didn't, once we went through and we're using Cloudflare, it literally was checking a box, and it's all taken care of. So a lot of it depends on what services you use on the back end. If you're doing, all of your own DNS, and you like doing that type of thing, then more power to you. But it's one of those, it's almost not worth the trouble to worry about all of the issues with bind and which version of Windows you have. I would say DNS is one of those easy ones to go software as a service and just pay. Alrighty. Well, we know that there's prizes and the exhibit hall, so please, everyone, take a visit over to that. I will post the link just in case nobody has it. But if you head over there, go to the exhibit hall. I think all the vendors are there, and they'll be doing prizes afterwards. So appreciate everybody sticking around after 5. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate you being my partner in crime on this and informing everybody. So
thanks, everybody.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Nicola.